Hi, I'm Dr. Janice Morrow. Thanks for joining us for another episode of American Mood Swings, where we talk about the brain and all things related to mental health. Welcome. Today's guest is Kelce Jager. She started a nonprofit, Rise with Grief, as the result of dealing with the loss of her husband, Colin. So we're going to hear her story and what prompted her to write the book and her journey. It's holiday season now. It's just a few weeks before Christmas, a couple days before Thanksgiving. And for a lot of people, it's a joyous time, but for many people, it's really, really sad. They feel, especially when they're a widow or they've lost their family, and it's unbearable. We see suicide spike at this time of year for sure. So thank you. I really wanted to talk about grief at this time. So thank you so much for being here. A couple days before
Yeah,
Thanksgiving.
thanks so much for having me, Janice. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
All right, well, let's just, I'm going to share your book here. So Kelsey's book is a Million Miracles and the One That Didn't Come. And I read it. It was a real tug on the heart. It was brutal and but uplifting as well. And we share the same faith, which I didn't know. We're both LDS, a church. Well, the nickname is Mormon, but the church, it's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So we're going to hopefully talk a little bit about faith and getting through things like this. And one question I did not put on the list is that I was curious if you had ever dealt with like a death before, because I know the first death I dealt with was when I was 23. My brother Alan died in a motorcycle accident, and prior to that, really happy, pain-free life, and that was brutal. Like probably to this day, probably remains the most painful because it was so unexpected. He was about to be married and it was sudden. It was in Utah, but he was very strong LDS return missionary and a lot of faith, but it was still, I probably cried every night for 2 years. It was brutal. And I never thought I'd stop crying. And I did, but it was a brutal 2 years. So let's hear your story and for people that haven't heard and talk about your book.
Yeah. First, I just have to point out, I love how many yellow sticky notes you had
Oh
in my
yeah.
book.
I
They're
am
sticking out everywhere.
I I'm a sticky note person. I don't read on a Kindle or Audible. I like to have a book and mark it up and reread it and save things. And anyway,
Yeah. So, anyways, I love that. I had to point it out.
yeah.
Um, so I'll answer your first question and then we can get into the book. I had known grief, but not from a death. And I mean I did, but not this close. I My first experience with grief from death was when I was 3 years old and my grandfather passed away. Um and he wasn't, I mean, he was old enough to be a grandfather, but he wasn't super duper old. He had had a stroke and was during surgery. And I remember seeing his at his funeral, seeing his body in the casket at the church. And I'm 3 years old, so I don't remember a whole lot, but I distinctly remember that. And I remember my mother and my sister crying. And I remember thinking, why are they crying? Like, why are they so upset? And I remember looking at him and thinking he looked like he was sleeping. And I certainly my 3-year-old brain could not grasp the enormity of that. Um, and then in 2017, my husband Colin, his father, actually passed away suddenly at the age of 70 in a mountain biking accident.
Wow.
And that was, of course, very shocking, very unexpected. And I remember right after the news, just feeling like my body had been hit by a train and just feeling so tired and exhausted. And my brain was foggy. And I didn't no, that was a normal, natural response to grief. But I was kind of like, what is wrong with me? Like, what? Well, I felt like I almost had the flu without having the flu. And then, of course, my husband, when he passed away, that is the most grief that I've ever experienced. And it's life changing. It definitely is not something that you can prepare for. Um, Yet it's something that most likely everyone will experience at some point, and it changes you for sure.
I would say the same thing. I just being more empathetic. I think. Well, you're a nurse, so you're probably already a little more. I don't know what kind of nurse you are, but I know there's a profound moment at my brother's funeral that really changed me forever for the last, like, it's been about 34 years now, 33 years. But somebody from church that I hadn't seen her. It was a few years after high school, so people go their own way, and I hadn't seen several people. Most of them went off to Utah to go to BYU and stuff like that. But somebody just came up and told me that she loved me. But I think those are some of the hardest words to say. And it's really hard for most people to say those words, even family members. Certain cultures never say it. But ever since she said that, I know how it sounds so corny, but it really comforted me in that moment. Her name was Julie Mortensen. She was, yeah, I probably hadn't seen her in about 5 years. There were four kids. We just knew each other from church, and we all grew up together. But ever since that
Mhm.
moment, I have such an easier time telling people I love them, and not
Mhm.
you can tell it makes some people uncomfortable, especially if I know I'm not going to see them
Mhm.
for a while. They're older or something, or just a friend. But
Mhm.
prior to that, I don't think I did. And it just because I know how much it really, she probably never knew. I told her later, like, how much just hearing it from somebody, especially someone who's not your family. I don't know. It was really
Mhm.
profound. But let's talk about Colin and your four boys, and kind of the story. I mean, I want people to read the book, but you can give them like a little bit of a teaser what the book's about, and your journal.
Yeah, so my book, A Million Miracles and the One That Never Came, really, um, I wrote kicking and screaming. I did not want to write the book. It was very, very challenging to write because the book is written from my personal journal entries during the darkest days of my life. And to back up, my husband and I met in college, and we quickly fell in love. And we were married in 2003, and we started a family right away. Our oldest son, Ian, followed quickly by three other boys. So we have four boys total.
Nice.
And we both grew up in Southern California, and we're planning on basically staying there until, like, we weren't to have plans to leave any and live anywhere else. But in 2019, we had a very strong prompting that we needed to move to Florida. And it was really scary to move across the country to a place where we didn't know anybody. We didn't have any family or friends. And it's not like we were moving for a job. We were moving because we felt prompted to do so. We felt like God was telling us to make that move. And it took a lot of faith, and it was really scary. Um, but we were happy with the move. Yeah, we moved in December of 2019, right before the COVID pandemic.
Wow.
And um, so we were there for about 9 months in Florida. We were here in Florida for about 9 months. And it's in the middle of COVID, and our two oldest sons were out with their friends in the neighborhood, and they were on their way home and in a motor vehicle accident. And both the boys were rushed off to the emergency room. And in the emergency room, um, we discovered that our oldest son, Ian, had a brain tumor. And he had no symptoms. The only reason we found out about it was because he hit his head in the accident, which prompted the ER physician to order a head CT. And in that CT, we saw that he had a brain tumor. So that was really shocking. I got that news while my other son, Luca, who was in the accident, was being whisked off to surgery because he had broken bones and road rash up and down his body. And I was in the emergency room alone because it was COVID. So only one parent could be there. And it was, as you could imagine, a very, very scary, dark moment. And I didn't know how we were going to get through that, but we did. And with my husband by my side, we were able to do the things that we needed to do to get our kids healthy again. And thankfully, Ian's brain tumor was completely removed by the neurosurgeon. And we found out 2 weeks later that it was not cancerous, that it was benign. And so that was such a blessing and such a relief. There were still a lot of surgeries that Luca had to go through. There was still a lot of physical therapy and rehab that both boys needed to do, but we got through that. And we're coming to the end of 2020, and we are just like, let's close the door to 2020. Like, this year has been horrible. And on January 2nd of 2021 is when my husband ended up in the emergency room with a fever and chest pain. And he was admitted to the hospital, and it was about a week later that we discovered that he had acute lymphoblastic leukemia. So as you can imagine, this coming on the heels of the trauma of the accident and our son's brain tumor, and Lucas still having surgeries to repair the damage that was done in the accident, it was a lot. And I completely fell apart in the beginning. And so the book starts day one, that day that my husband went to the emergency room. And it follows through 559 days that he was fighting for his life. And it's all written from the perspective of my personal journal entries. And I do not hold anything back. I share the good, the bad, the ugly. And I didn't want to write the book, like I said, but, and I don't want to give away too much, but I do talk about this in the book. The reason why I wrote it is because my husband, Colin, that first stint when he was in the hospital, he went to the emergency room, was admitted. He didn't come home till about 6 weeks later. And that when he came home, he was in liver failure, and we didn't know if the chemo had worked. We didn't know if his liver was going to continue to fail or if it was going to repair and heal itself. We weren't really sure where things were going. But he came home and he told me that I was going to write a book about this story. And I looked at him like he was nuts. And I was like, okay, well, he's been on chemo, he's in liver failure, the toxins are in his blood, he's not making any sense. And so I just kind of was like, okay. And I was like, well, I'm not feeling that, but okay, whatever. But the whole time he was sick, he kept bringing up the book. He kept asking me, did you come up with a title? Have you started writing it? And I would look at him and think, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I do not want to write a book. I feel no prompting to write a book. I'm not a writer. Like, what do you like? I'm not writing. This book isn't happening. I think you're going to write the book. And he would just smile at me and say, "You don't know it yet, but you're going to write a book about this, and it's going to help thousands of people." And fast forward to about a week after he passed away. And I had not thought about the book because remember, this was
Yeah.
not my dream. This was not my idea. This was his. So I hadn't thought about the book in months. And I was riding my bike through these like forest trails by our house, trails that he and I had frequented many, many times together. And I was talking to him as I was going riding through these trails, not about the book, but clear as day, the words came into my mind. The name of the book is A Million Miracles and the One That Never Came. And in that moment, it finally hit me that I was indeed supposed to write this book. And it took me over 2 years to finally get it published. Um, but I am very, very happy now that I did write the book because it already has helped so many people. And that to me is so healing when I get to help other people, when I find purpose in my pain, that heals a part of my broken heart.
Well, I think that's beautiful. Yeah. So you're hearing from people that have already, they give you some, I love that they're giving you feedback. Well, I
Mhm.
know before I read the book, I think we just connected on LinkedIn, but you had some very uplifting posts that kind of pulled me in and, having experienced a lot of loss and grief and, it really drew me in. So, and I found the book. It was, once you go through it and you're at someone's side. My brother's death was quick, but both of my parents had chronic illness, so their deaths, it was a few years long for each one. And watching people waste away, it's very brutal. There's a lot of ups and downs, but it's really hard.
Mhm.
It's part of life. And I know we both, have faith that we're going to be on the other side together. I'm curious. It wasn't in the questions. I'm just curious. Like, were you guys sealed in the temple for when you were married?
Yes.
Was it temple?
Yes.
Just for our viewers or listeners,
Yes.
if LDS people, you can learn more about it if you want to ever read the Book of Mormon or have the missionaries come teach. But Mormons get married in the temple, most of them. And that one big difference is that, in a normal traditional ceremony, I think they say till death do you part. And in a temple marriage, it's, as LDS people, we believe that we're together for all time and eternity. So we get married in the temple and then our families are sealed to us. I remember being sealed to my family as a child. So it's a really important ordinance in our faith. If anyone ever wants to, explore that. But anyway, so there's faith. So now you've written a book, it comes out. So I'd love to hear how you navigate moving forward. You've got 4 sons. It sounded like they were still pretty young when your husband passed. And so besides the love of your life, your romantic partner, and then the father of your kids, like you got to navigate life and being there for them, all your families over here. So I'd love to hear how you do that. And then financially, I know for me, like the thought of being a single parent with 4 kids would be daunting. Yeah. All of the things. So, and well, let's how's your faith these days? Talking about grief. It sounded like it was always strong. Were you mad at God, or would you say your faith in God is still really strong?
That's a really great question. I was really angry with God in the beginning, um, when my husband was first diagnosed. And more than anger, I questioned God's love for me. I kept asking, if you loved me, why would you allow all these bad things to happen? And that mindset left me feeling completely alone and abandoned, like the heavens were silent and no one was answering me. And I was reaching out, screaming, demanding answers, demanding that he show up in a way that I thought he should. And he wasn't. And as time went on, I started to realize that I couldn't continue thinking that way. I couldn't continue with that mindset. And I realized I wasn't looking for him in the right ways. I was so focused on God fixing things my way that I was blind to the ways that he was indeed showing up. And when I let go of that need for control and I began to ask, where are you? Show me how you're here. I started to notice his fingerprints everywhere. And that is when I started to notice all the miracles that I talk about in the book.
Can you give just a couple?
And to answer the other,
Oh, can you give just a couple examples?
yeah, I mean, I talk about it extensively in the book, but um, there were so many things when something like this happens, especially to your partner. I felt so alone. Like Colin and I, we were partners in everything. And when the accident happened with our boys and the brain tumor, all that, like it was so challenging, but we were able to lean on each other. And when he was now the person that was sick, I couldn't lean on him in the way that I needed to. And there were so many people that rallied around me, that my community, um, both here in Florida and back in California. And then it started there and then it spread to places throughout the world, just strangers that I didn't even know. And that in and of itself was such a comfort and such a light in the darkness. Um, there were just so many things that I couldn't, miracles, medical miracles, things that happened medically that didn't make sense. There were just so many things that, like the title states, the one miracle that we prayed and hoped for did not happen. But that does not discount the millions of other miracles that did happen.
Do you ever,
So to finish your question, the second part of your question, but you want to ask a question first, that's fine.
no, finish what I asked. Yeah. I don't even remember. Yeah.
Okay. Um, you asked if my faith was as strong as ever. And I want to answer that because I think it's a really great question. Um, and the answer is my faith is not the same as it was before tragedy struck our family. It's different, but it's stronger. And that didn't come until after my faith was completely stripped down to its core. I questioned everything I thought I knew to be true, and I had to rebuild from there. So, what I've come to realize is that my faith is now, it's not based on what others have told me to believe. It's not based on the testimony of those around me. It's built on my own experiences, my own testimony in the ways that I have personally seen God show up in my life when I felt like I was going to die. And he, this is what makes it stronger. because it's rooted in something that's real and deeply personal to me. And I intimately know God now in a way that I didn't before. And I thought I knew him before tragedy struck. I prayed, I trusted, I believed, I had faith. But looking back, my relationship with him was more surface level. It was built on what I'd been taught and what I thought I understood about him. But when everything in my life was stripped away and I was left with nothing but raw honesty and vulnerability in my relationship with him, and I wrestled with God, I cried out to him, I even yelled at him. It was in those moments of brokenness that I encountered him in ways I never had before. And I didn't just know about his love or his promises. I felt them. I experienced them. I saw how he carried me in ways that I couldn't see before. And I get emotional when I talk about this because I hate that I had to go through such pain to gain this kind of clarity. But honestly, I don't know if I could have received it any other way. It was in the darkness that I learned to see his light. It was through the loss that I gained a deeper understanding of his presence. And now my relationship with him is personal, it's intimate, it's unshakable. And it's something that I cherish more than I can put into words.
That's beautiful. That's, do you ever feel Colin's presence? Like I ask everybody I know, like when somebody's passed away in their life, most people tell me no, that they don't feel their loved one. I do periodically. Um, but I'd love to know. It's been a couple of years since your husband passed. Do you ever feel his spirit? And I want to know how the boys are doing. And
I do feel Colin's spirit and his presence. To be completely honest with you, in the beginning, I felt it all the time. It was so constant and so tangible. And don't get me wrong, I still feel him close and he still gives me signs to communicate with me, but I don't feel it as much as I did in those early days. And that does make me sad. And I've spent a lot of time wondering why that is. Is it because as more time passes, that he's been here physically, that I'm slowly forgetting or not recognizing his presence? Or is it because I've become so distracted with life and less tuned in to noticing? Or is it because he's busy where he is now and maybe he sees that we're stronger and we've don't need him as close as we did in the beginning? I don't know the answer. But it is something that I think about and contemplate. But when I do feel him, it's so comforting and it's undeniable that he's there. And that is something that I treasure.
that's beautiful. It sounds like you guys had a really nice, happy marriage. And like you said, it sounded like you worked together too. I don't know how people do that. I couldn't be with someone, but that's extra special. How are the boys doing? And I'd love to know, it sounds like you're still in Florida because I would have thought you might have been tempted to come back if all the family was here. But if you built friendships, do you have a lot of support there? And I'd love to know, like, because there's four boys, are there men at church or who treat them kind of like second sons? When I was growing up at church, there was at least three or four of my friends' moms. I mean, I call them Mom Renata, Mom Judy. They were like a second mother almost because we spent so much time. Do you have that in Florida? Do the boys have mentors or people who treat them? I would imagine they miss a male presence.
So the boys are doing really well. They still have bad days and hard moments, but of course that's to be expected given everything they've gone through. Um, my children's healing has become number one priority to me. And in order for me to be the mom that I want to be for them, I had to make my healing my number one priority. But in a way, it then makes their healing a priority. I don't know if you're following me in that, but what grieving children need most is a safe and loving environment where they can process their feelings in their own time and way. And like I've said, I've worked really hard to give them that. And I've let them know that it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel angry and confused. Um, I remind them that they don't have to hold it all in and that they don't need, I don't force them to talk about it. But I let them know and I show them that I'm always here to listen when they're ready to talk. Um, so I've worked really hard to walk alongside them and to not push or rush their process, but I give them the tools and space that they need to feel supported and loved. And because of that, they're doing really, really great. Do they miss their dad? Of course they do. Is there men in their life that mentor them and are a male presence for them? Yes, Colin and I both came from large families.
Nice.
So we're definitely blessed to have male role models on both sides, his side and my side, that are active and involved in my kids' lives. But our family is all across the other side of the country. And to your point where you said, I would have thought that you would have moved.
Or been tempted.
Everyone tells me that.
Okay.
Everyone tells me that. Everyone tells me that. And I still, over 2 years later, people, when I go home to California, which I go home about twice a year, they still ask me, are you coming back? And people here in Florida will still ask me, are you moving back to Florida? And I said we were prompted to move here in 2019. I still feel like we're supposed to be here. Is it hard to be away from all our family? Yes. Do we have community here that has stepped in as family? Yes.
Yeah.
There are men who have stepped in to support my boys and provide that strong masculine presence. And I'm so grateful for that. It's been a huge blessing for all of this. But no matter how involved their grandfather and uncles and cousins and, men in our community and from our church are involved, no matter how much they pour into my boys, no one can ever replace their dad. And that's a void that they have to live with. And it's not easy. It's not easy, but I am so proud of my boys and how they are continuing their life after the loss of their dad.
Yeah, when my brother passed, I had three brothers, but it's interesting because mom and me talked about my brother Alan up until the time she passed. Once we talk about him often, but neither of my brothers or my dad could ever talk about it once he passed. They just, I don't know if it's just innate that men can't feel like they can talk, and I wish that they would have, but they never talked about him, and I wish they would have or felt comfortable. Maybe it was just too painful, but I very much liked it too. I'd love to know, kind of moving another direction, because I would have thought, I don't know if you were working outside of the home at the time of Colin when he passed. I know that you're a nurse. How was that mentally? Because now you've got to think, okay, now I'm a single parent. I've got to provide and feed four kids. It's expensive to live. I mean, I'm in California and crazy expensive. And I don't even have kids, but the thought of supporting 4 kids as a single parent would be daunting. So how did you navigate that path? And are you working as a nurse now, or do you do something else?
So let me break down the question. There's a couple of parts there. Um, when Colin passed away, we we were business partners, and we had a company that was in the aerospace industry. He was really the face of the company. I did a lot of behind the scenes. So when he passed away, I lost most of our income. And while we were blessed to be financially secure and we had planned in a way where we had always lived below our means, um, which has been such a blessing now because when he died, I lost most of our income. And so while I'm okay, I definitely had to adjust our lifestyle. We definitely have a tighter budget. We no longer live the way we once did. Um, it's been a shift, but I'm grateful for the foundation that we our time together. Currently not working as an RN. I started my company Rise with Grief, where I do grief coaching, and I'm doing that full time now.
Okay.
Um, so with that, to add on to that question, this is why life insurance is so incredibly important for everybody to get. It's not one of those things that you always think about. It's not one of those things you even really want to think about. And I mean, with insurance prices so high right now, it's like, why do I want to pay another insurance bill? But it's something that can provide a sense of security during a time of uncertainty. And I really encourage everyone to prioritize it, especially if you have dependents, especially you have children that are depending on you, because life can change literally within seconds.
I strongly agree with the life insurance. I'm kind of surprised how many people, because they spend it on other things. But for our viewers, I had mentioned, I shared a story with Kelce, before we started. There was a woman in my church back in the 80s, and her husband was involved in a fatal ski accident. It was a freak accident. They had 4 young children, and she gave a talk at church, but she had a skill so she could maintain their lifestyle, but it wasn't the same. But they didn't, she shared that, I never thought about it. Yeah, I was only a teenager at the time this happened, but how they would have had to move. So for kids, that can be pretty traumatic. Or if you're having to leave your school, if you had to go, whether it might be another state. I mean, see, it's hard to live on one income in California. So I would imagine if you didn't have life insurance, yeah, it could impact a lot. You could lose all your health insurance, and that becomes an issue if you have kids that are sick or a loved one. So yeah, it's really, and a lot of people just don't think about the money stuff, and it for peace of mind. Money worries keep you up at night, and that affects your. This show's about mental health and the stress. So you were okay, and you've been able to, and the boys, you've just adapted. Yeah. And Florida's a
Mhm.
pretty nice place to live, so you can still hopefully
I
get.
mean, I will say financially moving to Florida from Southern California was a great financial decision. It's it's a lot less expensive to live here. It's still more expensive than other parts of the country, but not like California. And we are able to keep our house and we didn't have to move my boys or
Good, good.
anything. I mean, we have been incredibly blessed.
Just shifting a little bit. Well, it sounded like you guys were real from reading your book that you all really love the ocean and the outdoors. So I'm glad that
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
a warm place. I had thought about Florida. I could only see myself moving to Hawaii or Florida because, I like the warm weather and
Yeah.
the warm water. I just wanted to I mean, we have a little bit of time left, but I wanted to know, unless it's too personal, because it's been a couple years, and some people, when they've been married and their spouse dies, they're like, I'm never getting married again. I could never love again. This is it. I'm not. And then I know other people. I have an older brother. He's like wife number four. He can't be alone for one day. So, so everyone's wired differently. I'd love to know if you and call it your husband as he knew he was going to pass, like if that ever came up, if he ever shared his thoughts, like, hey, I want you to move on when I'm gone, and it's okay if you love someone else. Um, if you guys ever talked about that and how you're feeling about that, like the thought of loving someone else, and your mental health with all that. I bet it's lonely romantically if you've had a partner after not, you've had four children and not being married. I bet it's lonely.
So I would tease Colin before he ever got sick that if anything happened to him, I was going to get remarried because I'd be like, I have so many things on my bucket list that I need a partner to do with. And so, like, you better not ever die on me because I'm
Oh,
gonna get remarried if you die. And he would get so irritated when I would say that. I mean, we were teasing, right? But he would be like, "Ugh," he would like look at me and be like, "Ugh," And once he got sick, of course, I never ever brought that up because I didn't even want to think about the possibility of him dying. And really the thought of actually him dying and remarrying somebody while he was sick would have thrown me into a tailspin and I probably would have started vomiting all over the room. Um, Colin didn't know he was going to die.
okay.
We didn't, he wasn't terminal. He didn't have a, his cancer wasn't, his cancer, his doctors didn't tell him there's nothing we cannot do. There was always something we could do
Okay.
until the last thing that we didn't work. And then there was nothing more that we could do. And when it failed, it was CAR T cell therapy, which I explained in my book. But when the CAR T cell therapy failed, the doctors told us, we don't know if this is a complete failure or if it's just like, because it's a newer therapy, if the body's just kind of freaking out and then it will come back. We don't really know what's going on here. So don't give up hope. It wasn't until the day before he actually passed away that the doctors came and told us there's nothing more that we can do.
It's crazy. Yeah.
So, no, we didn't have the conversation. I, when the CAR T cell therapy failed, I was, as you can imagine, a complete mess. And I asked Colin, like, what his wishes were if he were to pass. And he wouldn't talk about it.
No.
He got really upset with me and he said, not in the context of getting remarried, just what do you want me to do? What are your wishes? He actually got upset with me and said, I don't want to talk about this. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be fine. And so I dropped it. And then by the time they told us there was nothing more they can do, he was so sick he could barely communicate. And so I'm not bringing it up then. So I don't know. All I have to go off of is when I would tease him and he would get mad. Not really get mad at me, but he'd be like, oh, like, I don't want to talk to you about this. Like he would get irritated. But to answer your question, I do think I will get remarried one day, but that's not my focus right now. My priority right now at this stage in my life is my children and myself. And I don't need to be remarried, but I do believe it could enhance my life in the future. I know how beautiful a partnership can be. My husband and I, we had the most amazing marriage. It was literally, I mean, it wasn't perfect because we are two imperfect people, but we were perfect together. And so I know how good that can be. So would I like to get that again someday? Yes. Do I think it's possible? I'm not going to lie. I don't know if lightning can strike me twice. I don't know. And I am the type of person I will not settle. I don't settle for anything. So I do think I will get married, but I'm not rushing to do that. That's not my focus. Everyone's journey is different with this. Some people feel like they're ready to um, move forward and get remarried right away and date right away, while others may never want to date again. And there's no right or wrong answer. It's different. What is right is different for every person. But for me, right now, I'm focused on my healing and building a strong foundation for my boys. And when the time is right, I'll consider what's next for me.
Okay. Well, how about some closing thoughts? Let's talk about Rise with Grief and what someone can expect. When I edit this, we'll be sharing your website and how to contact you. But how does it work? Is it like an hourly kind of a thing, or what's the process if someone reaches out to you via your website?
So there's two different ways to work with me currently. Um, I offer one-on-one coaching. So if someone were to reach out to me, the steps in the process are first, I would have them book a free 30-minute call with me just to make sure we're a good fit and to make sure that like I can help them, that they're open to coaching. Not everybody is open. Some people just want like a quick fix, like just wave your magic wand and make me better. And grief is not something that can be fixed. It's something that needs to be integrated into your life. And so if I work with somebody, their first, I require an initial commitment of 12 weeks. And that's really within those 12 weeks, we meet weekly, one-on-one via Zoom for an hour. And I meet them where they are and I give them the tools that they need to learn how to integrate the grief, learn how to empower themselves so that the grief doesn't control them. It's still there, but it loses its power over you, it loses its control, and it's not this big scary monster anymore. When you learn how to integrate it, it's not so scary. So that is um the most high contact way to work with me. I do offer a self guided program. That's an online grief course that is also 12 weeks. And that is a more affordable option for somebody. And the way that works is every week they receive a pre recorded video on different grief topics that include tools. And I guide them through and teach them how to use those tools. It includes homework assignments and virtual grief books. And that does not include one-on-one sessions with me, but it does include coaching via email. And that is that is for people that really want to go do it on their own and want a more affordable option. And both options are great. Both options um, create, if you commit to the program, create transformational healing.
I love it. I wish I had done something. I know it's not too late. It's been over 30 years. I never did. And there's a lot of things I think, man, I probably should have. Like, here's an example. So I hadn't had any, I would say a lot, much pain at all before my brother died. And then when he died, and I share this with friends, and it's the first time I've shared it on the podcast. Like, I cried every night, probably for over 2 years. The days were busy. You're distracted with life, school,
Mhm.
work. It was when you're alone with your thoughts and your head hits. But now it's been like 32 years, and I think I've cried once or twice, and I've lost so many people. I think, what happened? Like, did my heart turn to stone? Like, it's probably
Mm.
some, what I'm really afraid of is like the one, yeah, like but I wasn't, some women cry a lot. They're just, were wired differently. I never was a big crier, but but I don't know if the pain was so deep that I'm afraid, like, if I start crying again, I won't stop for 2 years. But I
Yeah.
think I probably should have gone to counseling or talked to someone, because maybe it affected me a lot more than I thought, to not be able, because my parents have died, lots of friends have died. And it's very emotional, but not a lot of tears. And I'll think, it's healthy to cry. Like, what's the wrong? But I think counseling, I'm a big believer in counseling, and that it can be great and transformative. Well, any parting thoughts you'd like anything I might have forgot? Or I mean, I'm so grateful that you took the time. It's Thanksgiving week for our listeners, so it's just a couple days away. So you squeeze this in. I'm sure you're busy getting
Mhm.
your holiday together. So I'm grateful you took
Mhm.
the time to join us. And hopefully I'll release this next week, because I want to talk about grief during the holidays, because it's so painful for
Yeah. Yeah.
anything.
No, I mean, just I appreciate you having me on. I think that grief is something that we shy away from. It's something that is kind of taboo to talk about, and people don't like to open that box. You said something where you were like, think that if you feel it, like you might just not stop crying, or you might just be overcome and overtake everything. And that is a very, very common thought that people think. And grief is not contagious. It's not something to be fixed. It's not something that can be ignored or run away from. It's there because love was there first. And they're two sides of the same coin. And just like love doesn't need to be fixed, love can't be run away from, love shouldn't be ignored. It needs to be integrated into your life. That same principle applies to grief.
Well, I'm hoping everyone, one more time, I'll show your book. It's A Million Miracles and the One That Never Came, Kelce Jager. And I hope you'll all check out her book, and maybe look at her website. And if you think it might help you, it'd be a great thing to explore. So have a great Thanksgiving and Christmas, and hopefully we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks, Janice.
Okay, bye-bye. Have a good one. Thanks, everybody, for joining us for another episode of American Mood Swings, where we talk about the brain and all things mental health. Hope to see you next week, and please share with your friends.